Hey, good morning.
Joe, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing really good, thanks.
Nice to meet you. You look like you're cold.
Well, it's about 47 degrees outside right now.
Okay, where are you located?
Well, I'm located in Ashland, Oregon,
Okay,
but I'm up in near Maupin, Oregon on the Deschutes River. So
okay.
I'm on a little junket, so I get to go trout fishing this week.
Oh,
But
cool.
so the trout fishing happens in the afternoons, so I get some work done in the morning and go and screw around in the afternoon. So
I
it's kind of
like
a
it.
working day.
Right
Yeah.
on, man. Well, hey, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out.
Of course. Yeah, no, I love I love what you're doing with the musicians, and I know I'm an artist also, but not a musical artist, so I appreciate you considering it.
Yeah, I have a dual reality here. I do music and then I do kind of everyone else on the planet that's interesting. So it's kind of a mix of both. So we'll get into all of it.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, I kind of live in the dual thing too. I have a children's book series that I'm writing that is a nature-based children's book series, and so that's one side, and the other side obviously are the marketing books. So
Absolutely.
those are my two sides of my brain, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's what I want to get into. There's so much that's going on, but before we do, living through COVID's been quite a thing for all of us, and I'm curious, how did you survive that time period, and how has it transformed or changed the way that you do things now?
Well, I was kind of on the early part of working remote. So my agency, I've been doing digital marketing for over 13 years now, and so I was always remote, and I did my best to never see my clients in person. So for me, it was like finally everybody's catching up to me, and it's way easier now to convince people to just Zoom instead of having to go and drive and see them.
Yeah.
Um, and then what happened with COVID obviously was that since there weren't trade shows and there weren't events, then the digital marketing became a bigger priority, and so in that regard, my my work my workload increased, and I had a couple clients that were in that PPE space, and so in that way, I was very fortunate that it didn't affect me negatively on the business side.
Sure.
Um, and then I'm an outdoorsman and I play golf, so for me, it was fine. Like we still got a recreation, and we just couldn't
Yeah.
go out to dinner anymore, right?
Yeah. 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 It's interesting. Yeah, there was so many things about this that was good that we could be remote, but I think the irony of this whole time period is we realized we needed people more than ever. Community was such a big
Yeah,
deal, you
for
know.
sure.
So let's get to the heart and soul. You've kind of touched on a few things that you do, but let's get to the true essence. I'm going to hypothetically put you in front of a bunch of third graders at a career day. One of the kids looks up at you and they ask you, "What do you do for a living?" How do you answer
Yeah,
them?
I tell stories. That's what I do.
Beautiful. Well, and
And
that's
yeah,
that. Yeah. So, how do you explain to me what you do?
well, I know you're not a third grader, so uh, so I produce marketing campaigns for primarily B2B clients to help generate interest for their products or services. So I have some clients that are like build screw feeders for agricultural fertilizer mixing, um, paint booths that NASA and United Airlines use to paint giant airplanes, and then all the way to regional mortgage lenders for commercial real estate. And then I do have of course, on the complete opposite is my wife's a health club developer, so I understand direct consumer fitness marketing and have been doing that for 20 years. So, we generate 600 leads a month for health club membership.
Wow.
So
So, when you were in the third grade, what was your dream? What'd you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to play tight end like Dave Casper for the Oakland Raiders.
Are you still a
Of
Raiders
course, I'm
fan?
only uh, Las Vegas Raiders. I don't watch a lot of NFL anymore. They kind of lost me with the kneeling and all that stuff. So I'm a much more passive fan
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
than yeah.
Well,
But
no, go ahead. You're good.
no, and the game's changed a lot, right? Since the old days. I'm 53, we got to see all that, when it was still a tougher game, I guess.
Yeah, it's different. Everything's changed, and yeah, as with everything, even with baseball, it's like I
Mm,
never thought I would get to a point where it's like there's pitch clocks and people are getting thrown out because they're not fast enough. It's like it's the
yeah,
national pastime means there's no time limit. That's the beauty of it. But we're in
right.
such a like instant thing right now that people can't handle it, and it's bizarre.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of what this book is about, right? The marketing Gen Z is understanding the brain chemistry and the changes that these people, uh, what they've grown up with that's totally different than what you and I grew up with, and
Yeah,
how we have to we have to take the responsibility to bridge the gap.
yeah, for
Right.
sure. I mean,
Because
I
I'm with
think
you.
I think it's good to have a higher level of intellect and awareness and that we evolve to another place, but I think there's things too that are genuinely pulling us into directions that probably enable laziness to a certain degree.
Yeah, it's interesting because the brain can't tell the difference between doing something and thinking about doing something a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're just on that constant dopamine drip and you're getting satisfied, then you have no motivation to move because the brain thinks that you're satisfied.
Yeah.
So a lot of the neurochemistry is really for me because I was a psych major in college and then realized, wow, there's so much more to this that's just we're just animals, right? And if we don't trigger this animal body correctly, then it really takes us on this divergent path that's very Matrix-like. I mean, that movie was very prescient in terms of what's really happening in tubing our energy into a central source if we allow it.
It's interesting, like with eating too, there's a level of our body that only needs so much, but the way that the
Mhm.
food is manufactured and the way that our body interprets it, it's just more, more, more. And it's like, man, you just don't need that much.
And I made this observation the other day going in and, like the hoity-toity natural food store, and 95% of it is processed food.
Yeah.
5% is the actual stuff in the raw, right?
Yeah.
And all the way to the deli and the bakery and all the boxes and the fruit bottles of fruit juice. I was just like, no wonder we're all dying of cancer and
Right.
craziness because our grandparents never ate like this. They
No.
chopped.
Yeah, right. I mean, even when you look at meats and the way that they colorize it and everything they put into it, meat doesn't look like that. It's like everything's
Right.
just it's all for aesthetics. I mean, I think even about working out. Like I like to do sit-ups and push-ups. I do ride my bike, but I like to do things that are more aggro that don't require me to be like, well, I have to go into this fancy facility with all of these
Right.
machines. You can work out and make yourself into a better organism by doing things that are just part of like is there a ground below you? Do you deal with gravity? Absolutely. Let's go.
Right. No, it's true. I mean, look at that. I mean, just the whole yogic system. That's just body weight, in breathing.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's yeah, it's that meditative state. So let's go to your beginnings in life and get an idea of exactly how you became who you are today. So where were you born and raised, and what were some of the seeds that were planted into you to become who you are?
Well, I was born in Modesto, California, and which is Central Valley, south of Sacramento. And at that time, it was kind of hybrid rural. It was, 100,000 person town, but surrounded by orchards and cattle and dairy. And so my dad was a machinist and we grew up simply. We were working middle class people. And um, I spent a lot of time outside with my dad. It was a traditional, hunting and fishing and played sports, all those things. And then um, my first job was crawling underneath houses to dig the crawl spaces for the real estate guys to go underneath and check the foundations, right, for the pest control report. And that was when I realized I didn't want to have that kind of job ever. And so I've always liked to be around people and understand and solve problems for people. And so that was the sales and marketing side of me being able to come out that way. Studied psychology to understand myself and other people, and the rest has been ongoing. I've always been on the West Coast. That's another thing. Seattle, Portland, Arizona, California. So I'm definitely a West Coast boy.
What do you like the best? Which place that you've lived in?
That's tough. I really like. I mean, Oregon's amazing just because there's so much public land and it's easily accessible public property for outdoor activities. So Northern California and Oregon are really probably the best in that respect. Just
Yeah,
wildness, accessibility.
absolutely. So, in your life, who have you admired the most? Who's been kind of a hero or a role model for you?
Well, historically, men like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Those
Yeah,
those were men who had big visions and really moved mountains. Um, and and were thinkers and doers. And so I really appreciate and respect the work they did. Um, business wise, Jay Abraham, who's a marketing guy, and now even Elon Musk. I think that guy is amazing to watch. And um, so yeah, that's kind of the spread. Um, yeah,
It's interesting. I've heard a couple times in the last few months that you have this idea that Martin Luther King had a lot of money, like because of who he was and what he did. He didn't have
right.
any when he passed. He didn't have any money. And I think about a lot of these revolutionary kind of people, probably the same thing with Gandhi to a certain degree. It's like we have this weird notion of like, if this person has notoriety that they have to have all this money, but it's not necessarily the case. It's like you have it's not like Elon Musk. It's like it's a different kind of thing.
Yeah, but even Elon Musk is like he's more like Martin Luther King in the fact that like he doesn't have a big home. He's not building a giant yacht like Bezos is.
Yeah,
Like he's a man who's committed to his insanity, his genius. And
yeah,
so, the money is just kind of a byproduct of his contribution, I think,
yeah,
versus wanting the money, right?
yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of fascinating people in history, if you can meet anybody alive on the planet right now and spend a little time with them, who would it be?
Anyone alive? Uh, That's a good. I mean, that's Elon's an easy one. Yvonne Chouinard would be another one that I'd like to spend some time with. Um, there's the crazy writer Christopher Moore.
Yeah,
He's one. I don't know if you've read some of his
yeah,
books or that guy's crazy genius. Tom Robbins, same.
yeah,
So yeah, those kind of people who've got a lot of fabric and a lot of depth and a lot of gears to change into,
yeah.
right? Where you can maneuver around. Um, yeah, that's
Yeah, that's a great list. So, you're obviously out and doing, trout fishing and you're doing your thing. You got this balance between your work life and personal life. But what is it that ultimately motivates you every day? What is the motivating force for you to do what you do?
yeah. My existential purpose is looking for ways to trigger people into meaningful action, and so whether it's from the children's book that I'm writing for my grandson and the other people who get to enjoy it also, or whether it's a business book about marketing. Um, it's trying to provide some insight in a meaningful way that either can germinate over a long period of time or be immediately valuable and improve people's lives. And it starts from the inside of my tribe, my family and my friends, and then look to extend that out to my clients and then everybody that I interact with throughout the day.
So when you get to the end of the said day, how do you quantify a good day? How do you look back and say that day worked?
Well, I'm grateful for every day above dirt. I'm responsible for the good day, and as long as I had carried that correct attitude and the correct power with myself, it's a good day.
So you kind of talked a little bit about football in the beginning. If you could go back to the glory days and see a game live, see an event live, what would you want to see in person?
Oh, I would have loved to have seen that Super Bowl the Raiders and the Vikings played in, I think it was 1978 was the Super Bowl date, and there was just some play. Dave Casper was my favorite tight end, and so I would have loved to have seen him catch a touchdown and see those characters that were the NFL players in those days, right? Those guys all had they all had kind of crazy backstories that
Yeah,
were
they did.
fun.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There I saw some video clips recently and I kind of remember this when I was a kid where they would park cars on the inside of the field. These players are running and chugging and getting jumped out and they're jumping over hoods and it's like, "Oh my god." It's like an Evil Knievel stunt, you know? It's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah. Those guys, yeah, they had real funny stories. Matuzak and Otis Sistrunk, he went to the University of Mars, according to him,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Evil Knievel, I watched a documentary on him. That would have been fascinating to feel the energy in a stadium where he was gonna do his thing, because
Wow.
it was a different kind of event. I mean, you can't say it was all sport, you can't say it was all stunt. It was the precursor to these extreme things that we have with Tony Hawk and all these other guys on motorcycles, but he was the first guy that really did anything that was that, like, daredevilish.
That could build that kind of anticipation, right? And like you're
Yes.
saying, in a whole stadium. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty amazing.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's like that tight wire between life and death because it could have been one time he would have hit wrong coming down, and he did a couple times where it like it was
He I
bad.
think I think he has still has the record for the most broken bones.
Yes. They were showing kind of an X-ray of his body and all of these, like, screws and every it was like it was crazy. But I think in the documentary, they kinda showed how he started to get really rough with people and the press. And my dad was a car salesman in Lawrence, Kansas, just outside of Kansas City, and he ran into him at a hotel one time and just
Yeah,
kinda professed how much he liked him, and he said he was a pretty rough cat, like, he just wasn't
yeah.
gregarious, and I think you get to that point where some of these people, fame probably works on their nerves enough where they're just like, they just want quiet.
Well, yeah, and he probably was in pain most of the time,
Right. Yeah.
which
But he
which also twists
but
you.
he did live a long time. I was surprised how long he lived. I mean, he got to the point where they actually honored him on stage with Tony Hawk and all these other guys saying, "You were
Oh
the
wow.
one," you know? So,
Huh.
he was the precursor, and I didn't know. I thought the way this documentary was built up, you thought that he died going over Snake River, but
All right.
yeah.
Well, that was the hook, right?
Yeah, right, uh-huh, that's it.
Nobody
They
wants to see him die with his boots off.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So, let me ask you this, based on everything that you've lived in your life and the wisdom that you've gained through all the things that you've overcome and lived through, if you were to have a dream tonight, you ran into the 20-year-old version of yourself, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on the life you've led so far, what would you tell your young version?
I would just say to myself to spend more time sitting and thinking and less time in frenetic action, right? Like motion is not action in that you've got to have a thought out plan and be able to see the sequence of things versus just being in motion.
Isn't there a part of that I've learned as I've gotten older where it's like I always just like felt like I had to talk about it or bring it up or you just instantly want to start getting into it. But I think I've learned more and more as time has gone on. I just want to think about it for a little while. I want to internalize it. Is that kind of what you're talking about a little bit? Just letting it matriculate.
Yeah, to just to hold the space for it to develop, intellectually, spiritually, and then consider a lot of the kind of we call it to it and through it thinking, right?
Yeah.
All the way through instead of trying to figure it out in the middle.
Yeah. It was funny you mentioned existentialism. I used to run a couple labs for the YMCA, computer labs in
Yeah.
inner city areas, and they brought this consultant in at one point. High-powered guy, they paid him a lot of money, and he gets into the room and he's trying to like clean everything up because there were some issues with the YMCA of Greater Kansas City. And at one point, they went around the room and I brought up Waiting for Godot. and he stopped on a dime and looked over and just totally freaked out. Like somebody in that room understood existentialism. And I'm thinking, how do you not understand existentialism? How can you not understand that you got to move on and let it go? You know, it just made sense.
I love it.
So anyway, we were pals after that. I mean,
I bet.
but let me ask you this. Speaking of kind of getting to the essence of things, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you're in control of your life. What's your
Yeah.
perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I'm still in development. And I've some days I think, wow, I don't know if I'm gonna live long enough to reach my capacity.
Right. I feel
you
that.
know. And so I've done a lot of things I want to do, and I want to continue. My perception would be that I still got more work to do, and that there's a bigger gift to give to the world.
Well, let's be a little bit more to the point with this. What are you the proudest of that you've done in your life up to this point?
Really writing this children's book, that was the most authentic and vulnerable display of who I am to the world, and so it's not for the accomplishment of the book, but it's for the process of being confident enough to show that side of myself to the world.
Isn't there something that's genius about the idea of children's books? Even like everything we need to learn is in kindergarten. There's a level of us that strips all of the fences that we put up as adults around our lives as we get older, that brings it to its elemental level. Is that kind of a little bit of what you're talking about?
Yeah, so I mean, it's the idea that here's the story that I created, and then is it you know is it deep enough for the parents to read, and is it engaging enough for the kids to enjoy, right? And so there's always those two audiences, and so that's the challenge, and then it's a creative act. And when then we're always concerned that we're not good enough, or we're going to get ridiculed for creative act, in my experience.
The interesting thing about kids, one of my favorite poets who's from LA, Charles Bukowski, I always remember the quote, "We're born geniuses and buried idiots." Kids just we
Yeah.
have it all figured out. And then throughout life, it's like everything's just kind of fettered off because we all get afraid and we lose that sense of adventure and wonder, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's been one of the good things for me on writing and publishing these books um, has been opening up creatively, and bringing those stories in from my heart for my
Yeah.
grandson, and that's the purest expression of my support that I can make, and that's been healing for me too.
It's interesting you mentioned your grandson. I always heard, and I try to corroborate on this, Tolkien wrote the Lord of the Rings trilogy because he was afraid that storytelling was going away, the actual
Mm.
construction of stories, and it was just a byproduct of him reading to his kids at night. How mind-blowing is that that this enterprise was created because of the love of telling stories to your kids?
Yeah, and I think the genius of what Tolkien did was to take those old myths that were forgotten,
Yeah.
and breathe some oxygen into the fire of those myths. Because I'm a Jungian at heart, and the archetypal characters that series are unbelievably powerful, just to keep us connected and alive as humans.
Yeah, it's huge. It's like you said in the very beginning, to the third graders, it's about storytelling. It's about getting to that
Yeah.
point where, because that's really, I think, one of the main functions that we have as human beings in the shared experience that we have is talking about these things that we live through and making it and embellishing it to a point where it perpetuates the cycle.
Yeah, and drawing out these threads of understanding, and lessons, and ways to be that are improving ourselves and our situation, and that's the point of myth, and the point of storytelling. I agree.
For sure. So if anyone wants to get your children's book, learn more about you, anything pertaining to your world, where can they go?
To emmanuelrose.com. Very simple.
One-stop shop, man. Hey, get out there and enjoy nature. Thank you for taking a minute out. I appreciate you opening up your world. This has been wonderful, man.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too, man. Take care. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.